I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mrs. Noreen, would you lead us in a flag salute?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sunshine Law Statement. All requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been met for this meeting of the Board of Education of the Borough of Oradell. Notice of this meeting was filed with the Record and Town News and all persons requesting such notice. Mr. Darian, would you read the mission statement?
The Oradell Public School District is dedicated to the ongoing pursuit of educational excellence through the comprehensive, innovative curriculum instruction. The district is committed to providing opportunities for social, emotional, and academic discovery to foster curiosity, courage, and character. Our goal is to prepare our students to become lifelong learners who are self-directed, resilient, productive, responsible citizens.
Thank you. Roll call.
Ms. Acosta?
Here.
Ms. Negum?
Here.
Mr. Griffin?
Here.
Mrs. Norian?
Here.
Ms. Shapiro? Mrs. Walker? Here. Mr. Walsh?
Here.
Mr. Darian?
Here.
Mrs. Nichols?
Here, open to the public for agenda items only. If you're joining us on Zoom, please raise your digital hand. We'll move into the Superintendent's Report.
Before I begin the primary part of my report today, which will be the presentation of the 2021 Fall Start Strong results, I wanted to take a moment to give some additional information on one of the submissions you'll be asked to approve today. The Student Safety Data System submission, which was previously called the EVERS, the Electronic Violence and Vandalism Reporting System, is due at the end of the month. Twice a year, districts need to upload reports inclusive of how many incidents of violence and vandalism they've had, which we did not have any. While we did not have any sexual assaults or weapons charges, we do need to also report number of founded and unfounded HIB investigations and numbers of trainings and programs conducted that address social emotional learning. So we will be submitting that we had 3 unfounded HIB investigations, that we've done 4 trainings with staff this year on the district HIB policy, on anti-bullying Bill of Rights, and also on suicide prevention. We'll also be sharing 4 programs that we've done, including Open Circle and several of our social emotional learning programs through the counselor's office. There is no printout for that specific report, which is why I wanted to share a little information for those of you that might be new to it. Additionally, before I begin the assessment presentation that I will do with Mrs. Brancato, I did want to take a moment to say thank you during School Board Recognition Month for each of your continued dedication to the district and, most importantly, to our children. I know that so many people don't realize how much happens behind the scenes, but as I've been answering emails about the packets over the past 3 days, I know that you're all doing a lot behind the scenes, so thank you. And now let's get to the big part of today's presentation, which is the Start Strong assessment results. So to give you a bit of an overview about the Start Strong assessment, last spring, the state of New Jersey requested from the federal government permission not to give the NJSLA assessments in the spring. So they felt that how could you create a valid learning environment, testing environment when you have some kids at home and you have some kids in school? And the federal government said, we will give you a waiver as long as you do something to assess students across the state. And that's pretty much where the Start Strong assessment came from. So the Start Strong assessment uses some of the questions that the NJSLA had used previously. So we know they're valid questions. We know they're reliable questions. They were on prior assessments. However, on our 4th grade assessment in September, they were questions from the prior NJSLA 3rd grade assessments. Because in 4th grade, what we were really looking at was where are the learning gaps for our 4th graders from last year? In 5th grade, where were the learning gaps from 4th grade? And that's why a lot of people got confused in the fall and said, why aren't we testing our 3rd graders? Because in the spring, 3rd graders get tested. There were no questions to use with that population because there has never been a 2nd grade test. It's actually in New Jersey State Code that we can't do standardized assessments in second grade. It's one of the reasons the COGAT stopped happening in second grade several years ago. Some of the differences between the NJSLA and the Start Strong assessment also had to do with the fact that when you take the NJSLA, there's open-ended questions. Students have to write. They have to show their thinking in mathematics. But the state knew that this assessment in the fall would be useless if we couldn't get immediate results. So as soon as students stopped testing, their teachers were able to see their results. The other thing that was different in this fall Start Strong assessment was the teachers actually could see the questions. So normally we can see it's adding fractions that students struggled with. But this time we were actually really able to look at the questions. And sometimes that lets you know that it might not have been the content. It might have been how the question was written. I saw that a lot in our science section, that it took a lot of stamina to read through the science questions, where I actually started taking some of the tests myself, and I'm going to be honest, I don't think I did so well because I realized you really had to sit there and read through a couple times. So when we knew stamina was a concern, I do think that may have played into our science scores a little bit. So these were the assessment areas. We assessed language arts and math in grades 4 through 6. And we also assessed science in grade 6th grade, which in grade 6, which would have normally been the 5th grade assessment. Really important to always remember about science, it's not the science from that year. It's the science from the prior 3 years. So we may not do earth science in 5th grade, but there's a unit in 3rd grade, and you're supposed to hold on to that knowledge all the way through 5th grade. And I think one of the hardest parts for me when I look at data, I'm always looking for variables and things that I can compare to. And we're specifically being told, don't use this data that way. This data is not supposed to be used to see how our program was last year. This data is specifically supposed to be used to identify areas where students are struggling. Maybe that's multiplying fractions and filling that gap. And I know if you're like me, and many of you are, that's really hard because you've given me a number and I want to compare that number to some other people and be able to say, we're doing okay. And we are specifically being told, and I think that's why we haven't seen that printout in the paper yet that usually comes with all the districts. It's not even on the state website yet. We keep checking on the back of the website. It's not there because they really are saying to us, you cannot use this data that way. One of the important reasons you can't is it's a shorter test. So it might have only been one adding fraction question. It doesn't compare as well to the NJSLA. So when we look at our overall results, and I'm not quite sure why the state is using these shades of purple, because I don't think it's the greatest way to present data, but the way to look at it is you want a lot of dark purple. Dark purple means that students need less support. Now, less support is an interesting term. I would prefer if somebody would say they needed no support, because those kids in less support, many of them got perfect scores. However, because the assessment was so short and the state doesn't feel that they've shown complete, how could you show complete proficiency in a 45-minute assessment that is normally over 3 days, they won't use that terminology. So yes, some of our students who are in that dark purple category actually scored perfect scores on the assessment. So you'll notice, and this is a trend we've seen before, our language arts scores overall as a district are stronger. 67% of our students in grades 4, 5, and 6 that were assessed are in that dark purple needs less support category. 19% of them are in the some support category, and 14% of them are in the needs strong support category. In mathematics, you'll see that that dark purple area gets a little smaller, with 56% of our student population in grades 4, 5, and 6 needing less support, 26% needing some support, and 18% needing strong support. And then when you get to science, I want to remind you again that this is only 6th grade. So this is only one specific cohort, and we see much more even distribution, but the smallest number of students in that high, less support needed category. Now, when we go to present this information, there are some things by law we have to present, and that includes the subgroups. So we've given you the data with regard to male and female. We've given you the data with regard to ethnicity and the breakdowns. And one of the areas we often look at is how are our special education students doing? And you will see that they follow the trends of the rest of the district. So if you look at on page 8, language arts, you will see more of them are in the needs less support category than you will see in mathematics. I'm just going to give you a moment to look at that, and also to clarify that on the bottom of page 8, you will see current EL students. That means our English learners who are currently receiving ESL instruction. On the next page, you will see former EL learners. That is students that are not currently in the program. However, they've been exited less than 3 years ago. So the state always wants to make sure that we haven't just exited them and said, okay, go off, that they continue to perform. And I was quite impressed with that. Our former EL students are almost all in needing less support in language arts. So clearly their ESL program has done them well. The one area, and I can't say that this is a huge data find, but data can tell a story, but data can also kind of give us the spark to look at something. And the reason I don't say this tells a full story is because when we look at gender in language arts and then in mathematics, we're dealing with 3 cohorts of students. We're dealing with grades 4, grades 5, and grade 6. When we look at science, we're only dealing with 6th grade. So one of the pieces that I will do next is just to look at 6th grade in language arts and math to see if that trend, because there's a really interesting, the data takes a very different shape in science than it did in language arts and mathematics. And I kind of want to look at that a little bit because I'd like to look at the fact that twice as many of our female students scored in the need strong support category in science than their male peers. So it's something that we just want to look at. It's not definitive. It doesn't say anything huge yet, but it gives us something to explore a little bit more. We then started to look at the individual grade level analysis. And so at the beginning of the presentation, I shared that 14% of our students needed strong support in language arts. And here you can see that by grade level band. So the least amount of students needed strong support in a 5th grade, and 3rd grade and 6th grade were equal in that category. When we look at mathematics, we actually see that our current 4th graders that were assessed on the 3rd grade actually did better than anyone else in mathematics. And then you see a breakdown of science across the 6th grade. So we have the data now. In her position as Director of Curriculum, Mrs. Brancato has been working with the school-based administrative team and also our teachers to decide, okay, so we have some findings, what are we going to do with regard to those?
Hi, everybody. So our first step was, as an administrative team, to review the data and kind of look school-wide. And again, science was an area that we were looking at. So in looking at the science scores, we were thinking about how do we review these standards that we want to make sure that the students are mastering and address them in science lab to help to build independence in their critical thinking. Because again, thinking about science, while it's tested in 5th grade, 6th grade for Start Strong, it really does pull upon everything that they're learning in the years prior. So our science lab teacher did some work with looking at the levels of support that the students needed and coming up with ideas of ways to incorporate that in Science Lab. And we really thought Science Lab was a great place to do it because the teachers, the classroom teachers, attend Science Lab with the students, and the Science Lab teacher could kind of model some of the things. So, for example, the big push is really getting the students to be able to think critically and to analyze data, look at data sets, and come up with their own ideas about it. And so having her model that within the Science Lab, and then teachers can take it back to the classroom and do the same thing with even data sets that are public data sets that they can look at, not necessarily doing all the experiments there. And so that was one thing, a push that we really felt was important, and that's some of the work that we're doing. Additionally, we worked as administrators with the teachers to look at the data as well. And so together we kind of thought, what's going well with students? What kind of profile can we create individually for students, for small groups, and for classes as a whole? And looking at what did they accomplish in the year prior? And then what areas were there still gaps that we needed to make sure in our instruction in tier 1 and what everyone is getting, the whole group is getting, where do we need to make sure that we pull some of those gaps in the teaching and the learning? And then having the teachers alongside the administrators come up with those strategies and identify resources that we have. So we looked at the resources that we have available and how can we use them to service these, to fill these gaps with students in the classroom, again, in whole group, small group, or with individual students. And then finally, we use the data from Start Strong to review for our intervention as an additional data point. And that was one of the things that the state said, this should not be the be all, end all. It should be an additional data point to look at. And when you start to look at multiple data points, you really do start to see where there are strengths and where there are some challenges that we need to support students with. And so our pull-out intervention program, which we refer to as our tier 3, Start Strong, came into play when we were looking at students for that as well. In the work that we did with teachers, we had them, as Ms. Bozio said, review the specific questions, because a lot of it is, are they understanding what the question is asking them to do as well? And that's important for us to know as educators so that we give them that same playing field. We use the same terminology that they're going to be seeing outside of the classroom on different assessments. And so in addition to looking at how the questions were worded, we looked at the responses because we could see the various responses and the correct response. For teachers to kind of think in their planning, what sort of misconceptions could students have on these particular questions? And that's important for us as educators to put into our planning, because it's one thing to teach it, but if we're not thinking about how the students will interpret it, we're missing something there. And those are those teachable moments. So we had the teachers identify trends for their classes overall, looking at what's going well, what are the students doing well, where are their successes, because we want to take those successes and help the students to apply what they already know well into the areas of growth for them. And then we wanted to look specifically at, okay, how do we support the students? So an example, when we were working with teachers that came up in 6th grade was Start Strong identified that students were having trouble understanding dialogue in what they were reading. They were misinterpreting who was speaking in the story, what sort of inferences to be making. And when we talked with teachers, they were saying, wow, we're seeing that same thing in their writing. And so it makes a lot of sense. So that's a key example of how we're using Start Strong to support what we as teachers are already seeing and knowing and solidify a plan of action. So what the teachers decided to do was to look at what they were teaching, plan a lesson around dialogue, teach it to the group because it was a trend for the class overall, for the grade level overall, and then do an exit slip and see how the students did after the reteach, specifically targeting the areas that they identified in the assessments. And then using that data that was collected from that exit slip to kind of do their tier 2, which would be who needed additional support. And it helped to, some students just needed a little bit of a refresher with it, and some needed a little bit more intensive. And then finally, again, reviewing the data to determine additional needs for support during the WIN period, which is what I need. So in addition to sharing the data with with ourselves, with teachers, parents were also provided access to the score reports and encouraged to really facilitate that dialogue with the school regarding the student progress and the goals. And there's an example of what was shared with the parents, just giving the support level that the student needed and in the topics, the main topics there. And then finally, the curriculum committees and grade levels will use the data to continue to review and revise our district curriculum in these areas. We are doing, curriculum work with some of the new standards that have to be implemented for September. And one of them being that computer science and design thinking, which is another way to sort of incorporate the science pieces into all of our curricular documents. Professional development, we're continuing to do, particularly in the area of math workshop, to really support the differentiation of instruction within the classroom. And then again, kind of looking back to what resources do we already have and how can we support teachers in fully utilizing those resources, for example, Dreambox and Linkit. So we're doing some PD around that. We had one Dreambox PD in November, and we have another one that will be upcoming in the next couple of months. And really helping teachers to be able to use the data that we're capturing from these resources to make decisions, instructional decisions for next steps for students. And again, it's one of our foci for accelerated learning portion of the American Rescue Grant that the ESSER 3 that we had submitted to the state. And again, this data is going to continue to be used as evidence to consider students for participation in various resources to focus on that learning acceleration. For example, our intervention, after school or summer programs.
Thank you, Mrs. Brancato. Does the board have any questions?
Do you have a sense, the comparison of this information from what our Linkit data was telling us?
We would have to go back and look at the spring data. Remember, we can't use the fall data because it's a completely different set of standards. But that's pretty much what Mrs. Brancato was saying. So what we were trying to do is say, okay, Start Strong said the class was weak in adding fractions. Does Linkit show the same thing? And if it didn't show the same thing, we didn't necessarily make that a focus because we know that Start Strong only assessed a topic sometimes with one question. And that's just not enough data. So we actually had to use Linkit to create the full profile.
Okay, thanks.
So is the Start Strong, this was our first year. Is it predicted that we're going to be doing that every year?
No, we'll go back to the NJSLA this spring. We've already been given dates. And really, Start Strong was a way for the state to not do the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment last spring. So I can't imagine the state would want us to test twice during the year. So I would think that after our NJSLA assessment this spring, we won't see Start Strong again, especially since they gave us the questions.
Oh, well, so from what I read, the Start Strong was only an hour and a half, correct? The kids were timed so that science could have an effect on the timing and not reading it properly.
Sure. It was definitely a shorter assessment. I mean, if you think about it, take fifth grade. When fifth grade tests science, they have 5 days of language, arts, and math, and then 2 days of science. So this was, an hour and a half for language, arts, and math, and another 45 minutes for science. It was a much briefer picture.
It's interesting over the years. I was involved in New Jersey Ask testing for quite a while. And at that time, I remember some educator or notable person who was talking about the results of these tests where we were raising illiterate, what did he call them? Illiterate scientists. The kids did so well in the science area and not so well in the language arts area. So I guess we really beefed up our science program, or we've learned how to remediate and teach better to our kids how to take the science.
Well, with the language arts, I do think that where we're probably need to really think about is how we're teaching kids to apply information in science. I think they were getting lost in the questions because there was one and it was a marble rolling down a ramp and there was a video. So you had to read the whole question, watch the video, go to the question. It was a lot to it. And what's really interesting about the science assessment is you remember that we've only given the science assessment once, the NJSLA science to 5th grade. And the results were so bad across the state, they didn't even use them to evaluate school performance. And when they released it, NJ.com did an article about assessment scores. They released language arts scores and math scores, the state averages. They didn't release science. And I'm really curious about that, what the trends were out there. And again, I don't necessarily think it's science. I think it's how we're teaching kids to think about science.
What did the parents see?
The parents saw two different things. So on this slide up here, Mr. Walsh, this page over here, every parent got a paper copy of that, which showed exactly how their child did in the category. And then it broke down into physical science or life science in the case of science and showed them exactly how many questions they got right in a specific area. Now, what the state has really been pushing parents to do is to look at this digitally. So every parent also got a login to a digital platform where they could look at this as well.
So they didn't see the question asked and the answer that the child put down?
No. And I would have
So
to
that-
check to see if the digital platform allowed them to do it. I actually never went in as a parent to check that. So it's possible they may have been able to see that in the digital platform. I'll have to check that though.
So the teachers saw the questions and the answers, and they know what each child, the weakness or the strengths of each child in their class. But the parents didn't see it. So
The parents saw it by category. So the parents would have seen adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing fractions and known how they did with that category, but they wouldn't have seen each individual question like we did. I don't think anyway, again, and I will log in as a parent and check.
if they would have worked it a different way, the state, where they saw the questions, then the parents could have a little homework and work on the child too, especially, let's say, math or, I'm just thinking about math, but language arts would fold in there too. They didn't see it. They saw that the child got so many right in language arts and so many right in math.
They would have seen that the child got so many right when reading a story versus how many they got right when reading something like a magazine article. So they would have known that their child was stronger in reading, narrative stories than they were in reading nonfiction. But again, I'm curious now to check the online platform to see if they were able to see more information, because they were very open with that with teachers. I mean, what we were able to see this year, not only with regard to an individual child's performance, but as Mrs. Brancato spoke about, misconceptions. When 68% of your class gets a question wrong and they all answer the same wrong answer, it kind of tells you that they're all carrying that. And if you can correct that quickly, then you've solved a big problem. But Mr. Walsh, I will look into the platform and check.
I did have a question. On the results related to IEP 504s and the English learners, any insights you guys could draw from like the comparison to past test on like the differential on what they compared to the other students, the general students?
We need to do one more level for me to speak more articulately about that because I would need to see the math breakdown. I do know that the last time we gave the NJSLA, there was one specific grade that our special education students very much outscored their performance in math by language arts. So when you look at the trends for 4, 5, 6 together, that's how I sometimes know, wait, we need to look at this specific program. So it doesn't shock me that they did better in language arts than math, especially because many of our students who have identified special needs are weaker in writing than reading, and we didn't assess them in writing. So, but I would need to look at the individual grades to see if there's any surprising trends in mathematics.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Can you just tell us or tell me what is the category non-economically disadvantaged?
If we had any students who were free and reduced lunch, they would have been in the category economically disadvantaged. So they've just taken everyone else.
So this is everyone who is not economically disadvantaged
Correct.
in our building.
Correct.
It's a strange
It's
way of putting it. Non-economically,
the purple reports you're seeing, just so you know, those are right from the state. And the ones that are the 3 different colors, the yellow, green, and red, those are from Lincoln. So the state definitely has some interesting ways to break things apart sometimes. And that purple slide is right from the state website.
it sounds like a term that the state would use
Yes.
more than we would use.
Are you allowed to say how many students is the breakdown in the economically versus non-economically disadvantaged?
Well, there is, if I remember correctly, there is no economically disadvantaged on there, correct?
There is not.
I am going to say that it's because there may have only been one student who would have fallen in the economically disadvantaged category. So they could not include his data because it would have been identifiable.
So when we look at the economically non-disadvantaged category of ELA, 14, 19, and 67%, it's basically,
The school.
yeah, the whole school.
Yeah, it's the whole school.
So
Ms.
just wanted
Needham?
to like maybe provide more of a comment here than anything else. I think this is good. I was honestly a little surprised to see the science results, right? And it would be great to understand what are some of the focus areas that, after having done this analysis as it relates to the curriculum, what are some of the focus areas that the teachers are planning to work on? And I think when we did our goal setting for the year, we had talked through some specific ideas of how we could bring the community to help out, right? So it would be good to, if there are certain ideas that can come out from the administration and we can share it with the parents to see, the reinforcement of ideas. Again, the PTA is doing science workshops, right? That's one way to reinforce some of those ideas. So it would be great if we can collaborate on that front.
Yeah, because I think that we sometimes, when we look at the science, we think it's content, and I don't think it's content. And I think there's some really easy things that we can give parents, even when the PTA does the science workshops,
Right.
the types of questions that you can ask that will foster a certain type of thinking,
Yeah.
which is what we noticed was really the area in science that was the issue,
Right.
not the difference between a push and a pull,
Right.
the application of that.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that we can continue to work on.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to our meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, that concludes my report.
Okay, Business Administrator's Report, Mr. Marmara.
Thank you. Just a couple quick notes to bring up. So it's that time of year again for the personal, relative, and financial disclosure statements. In your packet tonight is detailed instructions on how to complete the forms. So once again, the forms are going to be completed online. There's also a frequently asked questions sheet that's in there to help you out. The due date for these forms to be in is April 30th. And for Ms. Acosta, since you're newly appointed to the board, it's March 4th. So you have a little bit tighter of a deadline. Also, to report as far as the 2021 audit, we're hoping that this week that the GASB 75 information is released. It's probably not going to make it in time for the February 5th submission of the audit report, but the state is willing to give leeway up until March 15th. So hopefully between now and March 15th, we might have a presentation of the 2021 audit just in time for our 22-23 budget presentation. And finally, just as Ms. Bozius said, just to take a moment to recognize January as being School Board Recognition Month and to thank everyone for their service. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. We'll move on to minutes, review of January 5th. Any questions or comments, please email Mr. Marmora. We have approval of December 8th. Would someone like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the meeting of December 8th.
Second?
Second by Mr. Griffin. Any questions? Call the question?
Ms. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker? Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
I abstain.
Ms. Nichols?
Yes. Administrative items, Mr. Darian?
Yes, I would like to introduce administrative item A1 through A5.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions?
I have one question, sorry.
Ms. Negum?
Yep. On A4, just wanted to understand what the student data system submission is.
That was the one that I referenced in my report about the HIB, founded and unfounded, and then the programs and trainings.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes. Buildings and grounds, Mr. Darian?
Oh, yes, I have, we've had no meeting since our last meeting, although we're trying to schedule a meeting next week. So with that update, I'd like to introduce item B1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions? Call the question?
Mrs. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker? Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Ms. Nichols?
Yes. Curriculum, Mrs. Norian?
Yes. No report. We have not had a meeting yet. Hopefully we will soon. But with that being said, I'd like to propose resolution C1.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Walsh. Any questions?
Yeah, just the trips to Ames, Iowa. Where is that to? What for?
That's for Odyssey of the Mind, I'm assuming.
Okay. These are competitions, each one of these?
Yes, Milburn is the regional competition. Princeton High School is the state competition. And if the team was to qualify for the World Championships, it would be in Ames, Iowa. The actual field trip itself would be on the next board agenda, but there is still a possibility the competition will become virtual. So we're just going to hold that off until February to actually approve that field trip.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Call the question?
Ms. Acosta?
Yes.
Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Norian,
Yes.
Mrs. Walker, Mr. Walsh,
yes,
Mr. Darian,
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols.
Yes, Finance, Technology, Mrs. Shapiro's on here. Mr. Darian, would you take that?
Yes, I'd like to introduce items D1 through D11.
I'll second that.
Any questions? I have a question on D6.
Mhm.
These are our new rates with the state. When do we receive them?
These were received approximately, I think it was October or November.
What's the increase?
Actually, a little bit of a decrease.
Mrs. Walker?
I have a question on D11.
Yes.
Is the donor want to remain anonymous or?
The donor is actually the company. You may not know it, but our director of curriculum over there is a financial shark, and she can get a lot of free stuff out of people. And so this program actually believes very strongly in their program. So they are giving us 5 free subscriptions, and with those 5 free subscriptions come 5 tablets. When I spoke to the attorney, he encouraged that we put it on a board agenda and actually treat it as a donation.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Mr. Darian?
Yeah, item D10. I know we have a process for disposing of school equipment. But I thought of like the FAA, for instance, when they upgrade their traffic control systems, they take something out of a major airport and they put it into a regional airport. Then they remove the equipment from the regional airport and they put it into those smaller airports, and it trickles down the equipment. So I was wondering, is there a way that instead of just disposing it through our normal process, is there a way we can either donate it or give it to an organization that could appreciate that?
I could look into that to see if that's possible.
Okay.
Do you know what items they are this year?
It's an addendum.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was in the packet, behind the calendar, behind all the financial stuff. It's an email. So. Those are all the cameras.
Any other questions? Call the question?
Mr. Acosta? Mrs. Negum,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Norian,
Yes.
Mrs. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Walsh,
Yes,
Mr. Darian,
Yes.
Ms. Nichols.
Yes, delegate report, Mr. Walsh?
I have nothing to report.
Any meetings coming up?
No meetings
Okay.
coming up.
No, okay. Personnel, Mrs. Walker?
Yes, I'd like to present F1.
I'll second it.
Before I look for the vote, I just had a quick question about A, letter A, 1 and 2. It says $45 an hour and then not to exceed 24 hours. What does that mean?
What are you questioning? You're questioning on the bottom, that's $45 per hour.
No, not to exceed 24 hours.
So they're going to be paid $45 an hour, but they're
Right.
not going to be, but it's going to limit it at 24 hours. That's our max that we would pay out. They're not going to be working 100 hours. It's up to 24 hours.
Oh, okay. And those 2 folks will be enough to service those kids that come in?
Yes, and that's why it's 24 hours, because we're going to run the program for 6 weeks and then evaluate the program. So 4 hours a week, 6 weeks gets us to that 24 hours.
I'd like to present F1.
And with that, I'd like to second.
For the second time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Does Mr. Darian go on the personnel report? Or should he just be under finance? I don't know. Not that it really matters, but maybe we could look into that in the future, because I know it's been questioned before where board members go.
Yes. Yeah, that's not a personnel.
I'm not sure, so maybe we can look into that.
That's an expense reimbursement.
Any other questions?
I thought I got promoted or something. And
Yeah,
me on the personnel? I was like, what is that all about?
you're a lunch monitor.
Yeah, we want to see you out there.
Call the question.
Ms. Acosta? Mrs. Negum?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Norian?
Yes.
Mrs. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes,
Mr. Darian?
Yes.
Mrs. Nichols?
Yes, policy. Who is normally on policy? We're gonna come out with the committees in the next week, right, Mr. Darian? It's not a big change, but it was Mrs. Levy and Mrs. Shapiro and who else? Yes, any report from policy?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Public relations and COVID task force, Mr. Griffin.
Yeah, no update on the public relations, but the COVID task force did meet twice. I think we talked about the last one at the last meeting, but both of the notes are in the folders. The last meeting we had was on the 19th and discussed the current, state of the district, including absences, staff, and impact on operations. And then also had a discussion about any guidance provided, revisions related to quarantining and how other districts are handling that. Those were our items.
Thank you. Open to the public at this time. If you're joining us through Zoom, please raise your digital hand. Move to old business and new business. Mrs. Walker?
If you recall, probably you don't, last meeting, I brought out the fact that I had read the New Jersey Digest, the school board notice, and I just wanted to read the exact wording that it said, and it's Lefebvre is the new New Jersey School Board's president, and he noted that all continue to encourage boards to take advantage of the information and training it provides. Quote, "We know for a fact that highly functioning boards have a major impact on the achievement of students," she said. "We have a sacred responsibility to push forward with our mission." So we are pushing forward.
Mr. Darian?
Yes, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Today I spent 6 hours, I think. Yeah, at least 6 hours on a Zoom call with NJSBA on the Winter Legal Summit. And it was interesting. A lot of topics were similar to prior topics in the past. I think the one notable thing that I'd like to bring up is, since the COVID emergency task order or order, government governor's order is over, everything under the emergency provision no longer applies, which includes the Open Public Meetings Act. And so all the attorneys advised the board members to seek counsel on whether or not they should be meeting in person or virtually. Now, I know we meet in person, obviously, but some boards in town and across Bergen County still meet virtually, and we're no longer in the same emergency environment, so they need to revisit that. Now, in terms of what we do here with providing Zoom access, there's really we're in, this is a new technology and we're in uncharted territory. So the only concern is that the experience virtually is on par with the experience in person. And so there's been some legal battles over, as an example, someone had posted results on a screen of a vote. Some districts vote electronically and they don't verbally express, yay or nay. And it shows up on the screen, and the people in the audience was able to read it, but the ones on Zoom were not. And so, it was a legal battle over whether or not that was an issue. Now, fortunately, the results were published in the minutes, so the minutes are the official record. But, that's the kind of thing that, is becoming an issue, that the virtual experience has to equal the in-person experience. And other than that, the rest of the seminar was, the usual stuff. Thank you.
Any other old or new business?
I have an old.
Mr. Walsh?
I have the judges class is this Saturday for Odyssey of the Mind. So we're at it again, and I'm sure the kids are way ahead of me. I'm just a judge. So
Is it virtual? Is it online?
this one is virtual, yeah, but I think I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong, but I saw something about Milburn Middle School. It was in our minutes, but it might be live this year. The Odyssey.
We'll see.
The group that I am assigned to, spontaneous, can be done virtual, but obviously they pulled it off last year, but I'm sure it was a lot different. I'm sure the kids are ready. I don't know how many teams we have.
We have one team of 5 students, and because that one of the students is in 6th grade, they'll be competing in the middle school division. So there are 4 5th graders and 1 6th grader on the team. I came in this weekend to see them because I felt like I haven't had a good grasp on the problem, and they are definitely well into working on their set and their scenery, and OPS once has glitter all over it again.
CDs, apparently. They need CDs, right?
Any other old or new business? Any need for a closed session? Oh,
Right, I have
go
one
ahead, Ms.
question.
Needham.
Just looking at some of the emails that are coming out from the NJSBA, they have like the mandated training reminders coming out. So when should we kind of expect to hear, or should we start reaching out and enrolling? Like, what is the recommendation there?
So as far as the mandated training, you can reach out to me at any time. All the registration goes through myself. So just a simple email to me with what date you would like to attend, and I can do the registration process for you.
Thank you.
Any need to go into a closed session? If not,
Okay, I move to adjourn.
And I'll second that motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Good.